Imagine this. The rugged Australian Outback, a world of red dust, crocodile-infested waters, and silence that can feel louder than any city street. Out of this wild landscape came a character who would conquer the globe, Mick Crocodile Dundee. But behind the iconic grin, the knife that became a catchphrase, and the subway scene that melted hearts, there's a side of the story few people know. Hidden inspirations, dangerous accidents on set, real-life legends who burned out in tragedy, and even a secret version of the film most audiences never got to see. Here are 20 jaw-dropping facts you've probably never heard. Let's saddle up.
Number 1.
Before cameras ever rolled, before Paul Hogan put on that battered leather hat, there was a man named Rod Ansel. Ansel wasn't an actor or a comedian. He was a bush tracker, a man who lived by instinct sharpened in the harshest conditions. In the early 1980s, his boat capsized in one of the most remote regions of northern Australia. With no radio, no supplies, and no way out, he survived for months on frogs, insects, and even the blood of wild cattle. When reporters finally found him, barefoot, sunburned, and oddly cheerful for a man who had been through hell, he told his survival story with the kind of charm that sounded larger than life. Does that sound familiar? It should. Because years later, audiences would meet a character who felt a lot like Ansel, Mick Dundee. Hogan never publicly admitted that Ansel was his inspiration, but the timing, the similarities, and the uncanny details were impossible to ignore. The twist? Ansel's story didn't end like Dundee's. Fame never came his way. Instead, years later, he spiraled into paranoia, violence, and a police standoff that ended in bloodshed. The real Crocodile Dundee went out not with a smile, but in tragedy, a shadow that lingers over the legend we laughed with on screen.
Number 2.
Before the movie, Paul Hogan wasn't a Hollywood heavyweight. He wasn't even considered a safe bet. Hogan was just a television personality in Australia, known more for cheeky comedy sketches than for cinema. When he pitched the idea of a bushman in New York to film studios, they dismissed him. Too weird, too local, too Australian. Executives couldn't imagine anyone outside the Outback caring about the story. So Hogan made a bold decision. He didn't wait for Hollywood's approval. He co-wrote the script, partnered with a local producer, and funded the project himself. It wasn't vanity, it was survival. And against every prediction, Hogan's gamble paid off. The man no one trusted to carry a movie created a phenomenon that became the highest-grossing Australian film of all time. A lesson Hollywood would learn the hard way. Sometimes the outsiders are the ones who understand what audiences are craving.
Number 3.
Here's the ironic part. When American studio executives first screened Crocodile Dundee, many didn't even finish watching it. To them, the slang was confusing. The humor felt too Aussie, the pacing too slow. One executive even suggested dubbing Hogan's voice. Can you imagine Dundee without that unmistakable accent? But Hogan refused. Instead, the team created an international cut, trimming certain lines but keeping the soul intact. And when it finally hit theaters, the movie exploded, becoming a $300 million box office smash. Those executives who walked out, they missed the chance to ride one of the biggest cultural waves of the 1980s.
Number 4.
Sometimes the best ideas don't come in a writer's room. They come in moments of shock. In the early 1980s, Paul Hogan was in New York City promoting his comedy work. While walking the busy streets of Manhattan, he stumbled across a scene that stuck in his mind forever. A homeless man was being harassed, not ignored, but actively attacked by a group of locals. The cruelty, the noise, the sheer chaos rattled Hogan. In that moment, he thought, what would happen if someone from the Outback, someone like a tracker or a bushman, wandered into this world? Someone who didn't understand aggression, who wasn't hardened by city life, but instead curious, kind, and wide-eyed? That's when the seed of Crocodile Dundee was planted. The movie wasn't born as a comedy. It was born as a contrast. A man out of place, holding up a mirror to city life without even realizing it. And in many ways, that's why the movie connected so strongly. It wasn't mocking New York. It was simply letting us see our own madness through the calm eyes of someone who didn't belong.
Number 5.
In Australia, the movie's title was simple: Crocodile Dundee. No frills, no punctuation, just straightforward. But when the studio tested the title in the United States, audiences were confused. Some thought it was a documentary. Others thought Dundee was a place. A few even thought it might be about hunting crocodiles for sport. So the studio added quotation marks, Crocodile Dundee, to signal that it was a nickname, not a literal reptile. That small change worked wonders. Americans caught on quickly, and Dundee became more than a character. He became a brand, an icon that audiences instantly recognized.
Number 6.
On screen, the crocodile attack looked like movie magic, but behind the camera, it was dangerously real. While filming near a watering hole in Northern Territory, Hogan and the crew had no idea a real crocodile had slipped into the area overnight, drawn by the smell of discarded food. At dawn, with cameras ready to roll, chaos erupted. Shouts, scrambling feet. The massive reptile slid into the water just meters from where Hogan was standing. No one was hurt, but production shut down for a full day. From that point forward, every scene near water had real firearms on standby and extra safety spotters. In a movie filled with fake fights and rubber crocodiles, this was the moment everyone realized. The Outback doesn't always play by Hollywood's rules.
Number 7.
The Outback didn't just bring crocodiles, it brought snakes, and one nearly ended production. While setting up a low-angle shot in tall grass, a camera assistant suddenly yelped and collapsed. He had been bitten by a venomous snake. Panic spread through the crew. Within minutes, the medic jumped in. Adrenaline, compression, extraction. A bush pilot was called. They got him on a flight out within the hour. He survived, but the incident left a mark on everyone. For all the laughter and charm the movie would later deliver, behind the scenes, it was clear. This wasn't just a film set. This was still the wild Outback, where danger lurked just off camera.
Number 8.
Before Crocodile Dundee, Linda Kozlowski was a stage actress from New York, more comfortable under theater lights than in the wild. She had never filmed on location, let alone in the raw heat of the Australian bush. When the cast and crew arrived in the remote Kakadu region, the conditions were harsh. The men stayed in trailers. Kozlowski, she was given a corrugated tin hut. No running water, no insulation. Just 4 thin walls, a mattress, and the echo of insects buzzing all night long. But instead of complaining, she adapted. Every morning she brushed the red dust off her clothes and walked to set as if nothing was unusual. And when the cameras rolled, that quiet discomfort showed on her face. It wasn't acting, it was real. That raw honesty gave her performance a truth that audiences could feel, even if they didn't know why. Sometimes the strongest performances aren't born from direction. They come from the conditions you survive.
Number 9.
That battered crocodile skin hat wasn't designed by wardrobe, it was personal. Paul Hogan had been wearing that very hat for years. Scuffed, bent, and heavy with the smell of Outback leather, it wasn't just clothing, it was part of him. When filming began, the costume department begged him to use a cleaner version for continuity. Hogan refused. To him, the grime and the wear told a story. You couldn't fake history, but there was a problem. Lighting hated the hat. The brim curled, the band frayed, and the shine from the leather reflected awkwardly on camera. So the crew made duplicates, exact replicas, aged by hand, bent crease for crease, dusted and worn to match the original. Still, Hogan insisted on wearing the real one between takes, because for him, that wasn't a prop. That was Mick Dundee.
Number 10.
One of the most unforgettable scenes in the film shows Mick raising his hand and stopping a massive buffalo in its tracks. To audiences, it looked like bush magic, but behind the scenes, it was a battle of patience. The crew had rented a trained water buffalo, expecting it to hit its mark on cue. Instead, the animal refused to cooperate. Hours dragged on. A vet was called in. A mild tranquilizer was used. Still, nothing worked. Finally, after endless waiting, there was a short window, just a few seconds, where the animal stayed still. Hogan held his hand up, eyes locked, and improvised the moment with absolute seriousness. The shot was captured, the magic was created, and audiences around the world believed in the legend of Dundee's Outback powers.
Number 11.
It wasn't in the script, not the way you remember it. The original line was flat, forgettable, something about not being impressed. Hogan felt it needed punch. It needed to be iconic. So when cameras rolled, he ad-libbed. Out came the line, "That's not a knife. That's a knife." The crew laughed, test audiences roared, and just like that, a throwaway moment became a cinematic landmark. The line was quoted in schoolyards, parodied on television, stitched onto t-shirts, and etched into pop culture forever. It proved a simple truth. Sometimes the best lines don't come from careful writing. They come from instinct, from a performer knowing exactly what the moment needs.
Number 12.
By the time filming moved to Manhattan, Paul Hogan was already a household name in Australia, but in the United States, he was still a mystery. So imagine the scene. A tall man with a rugged vest, worn boots, and a giant knife strapped to his side, swaggering down the sidewalks of Midtown. The cameras weren't always rolling, but the crowds didn't know that. Locals thought Hogan was the real thing. Some stopped him for directions. Cabs slowed down, curious. One tourist even asked him for hunting tips. Hogan, never missing a beat, told the man Times Square was safe enough after dark. Just don't poke the locals. He wasn't filming, he wasn't acting, but already the myth of Dundee was alive in New York.
Number 13.
The finale of Crocodile Dundee is unforgettable. A crowded New York City subway station, a man from the Outback separated from the woman he loves, strangers passing his message down the line. It feels raw, almost too real. That's because it was. Months earlier, Hogan had been in a Manhattan train station, overwhelmed by the chaos. He was trying to say goodbye to someone, but the crowd swallowed him up. The noise, the rush, the distance, it was all too much. That helpless feeling stayed with him. So when it came time to write the movie's ending, Hogan didn't invent something grand. He pulled from memory. He recreated that moment of disconnection, but gave it a resolution. And that's why it resonates. Beneath all the comedy and Outback charm, the heart of the movie was about something universal, wanting to be heard in a world that's too loud.
Number 14.
When Crocodile Dundee premiered internationally, some audiences weren't sure who they were watching. Bootleg posters and mistranslated credits in certain countries even billed the film as starring Clint Eastwood. The squint, the swagger, the stoic delivery, to audiences unfamiliar with Hogan, the resemblance felt uncanny. Some foreign distributors didn't bother correcting the mistake. Others leaned into it, using Eastwood's name to boost sales. Hogan later joked about it. "If Clint wants the credit, he can have it," he laughed. But he's not getting the hat.
Number 15.
Here's a fact that surprises almost everyone. The movie was quietly helped along by a rock star. Michael Hutchence, the electrifying frontman of INXS, had deep ties to the creative scene in Australia. He believed in the project and provided support behind the scenes. There was no contract, no official credit, just trust. Hutchence never bragged about his involvement, but when he traveled in the United States and saw Crocodile Dundee playing in hotel rooms, he smiled. He hadn't just backed a movie, he had backed a cultural phenomenon.
Number 16.
Before Linda Kozlowski was cast as Sue Charlton, there was another woman already in line for the role, Nolene Hogan, Paul's real-life wife. On paper, it made sense. She had acting experience, and the chemistry with Paul would be guaranteed. But as production drew closer, concerns grew. Producers wanted someone fresh, someone who could stand out on her own and hold her own against Hogan's charisma. Enter Kozlowski. Young, unknown, and fearless, she nailed the audition. When she read opposite Hogan, sparks flew. Not just performance sparks, real ones. Nolene was out, Linda was in. And what started as a casting decision would later rewrite Hogan's personal life. It was controversial, it was messy, but it gave the movie the on-screen chemistry it needed. Chemistry so authentic that audiences believed every glance, every pause, every lingering smile.
Number 17.
As the cameras rolled, the line between fiction and reality blurred. In the movie, Dundee and Sue fall in love. Off-screen, the same thing was quietly happening. Hogan and Kozlowski spent long days filming in the blazing sun, trading jokes between takes, and relying on each other to survive the grueling shoot. Crew members noticed the way they lingered after scenes, the unspoken comfort. It wasn't part of the script, but it was real. By the time the film premiered, rumors were swirling. A love story had begun, one that would eventually end Hogan's marriage and pair him with Kozlowski for real. It was the kind of twist you'd expect in Hollywood, but here, it unfolded in the dust and shadows of the Australian Outback.
Number 18.
Success came fast. Too fast. Crocodile Dundee wasn't just a hit, it was a global tidal wave. Suddenly, Hogan was making appearances on late-night American talk shows, walking red carpets, and signing deals. Money poured in. But back in Australia, Hogan wasn't convinced the banking system could keep up. He didn't trust that the sudden windfall would be safe sitting in accounts. So he did something straight out of a movie. He carried suitcases of cash across borders, literal duffel bags stuffed with bills, flown internationally like he was smuggling treasure. For Hogan, it wasn't paranoia, it was survival. He'd built his career by betting on himself. And he wasn't about to let the system swallow his winnings. The irony? The man who played an easygoing bushman became an international millionaire, hiding stacks of cash in plain sight.
Number 19.
Hollywood didn't believe in Crocodile Dundee. They thought it was too Australian, too strange, too niche. The studios expected it to perform modestly at best. But when the film hit theaters in 1986, something extraordinary happened. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. Audiences fell in love with the blend of outback grit and fish out of water comedy. Families, teenagers, even critics couldn't resist it. By the end of its run, the movie had earned over $300 million worldwide. It wasn't just a hit, it was the second highest grossing film of the year, topped only by Top Gun. From the dusty plains of Kakadu to the neon glow of New York, Mick Dundee had conquered the world.
Number 20.
Paul Hogan was no longer a struggling comedian. He was now an international star. Sequels followed. Endorsements rolled in. Magazine covers, interviews, and appearances cemented him as a global icon. But fame comes at a cost. Hogan became entangled in legal battles over taxes, endured intense media scrutiny, and struggled with the pressure of living up to his newfound legend. Still, no matter what came afterward, nothing could take away the lightning-in-a-bottle moment of Crocodile Dundee. For a brief window in time, Hogan had united the world in laughter, curiosity, and admiration for the Australian spirit.
Bonus.
Every legend has two sides, the myth we celebrate and the truth we often ignore. The myth was Mick Crocodile Dundee, fearless, charming, the kind of man who could smile at danger and win over a crowded New York subway with nothing but honesty. But behind that myth was a man most audiences never knew, Rod Ansell, the bushman whose extraordinary survival story helped inspire the character. Ansell wasn't an actor. He wasn't chasing fame. He was just a rugged tracker living on the edge of the Australian wilderness. In the early 1980s, his boat capsized in one of the most remote regions of the Northern Territory. Alone, with no supplies, he survived for weeks. He drank cattle blood to stay hydrated. He ate snakes, frogs, and insects to keep alive. When rescue finally came, journalists were stunned, not just by his survival, but by his attitude. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't broken. He laughed and told stories like it was all a grand adventure. That charisma caught the eye of filmmakers. Years later, audiences would meet a character who looked a lot like him. Rugged, fearless, smiling in the face of danger. But while Mick Dundee walked into the hearts of millions, Ansell walked into something else: obscurity. As Hogan's star rose, Ansell's life went the opposite direction. Fame never came his way. Hollywood didn't come knocking. Instead, he struggled to make ends meet. He raised cattle, lived rough, and battled the isolation of the outback. In time, whispers of addiction and paranoia began to cloud his story. By the late 1990s, those whispers turned dark. Ansell grew convinced that people were after him. Shadowy figures, conspiracies, enemies only he could see. His paranoia consumed him. And in 1999, it all came to a violent end. Police were called to investigate reports of gunfire near his remote property. When they arrived, Ansell opened fire. A standoff erupted in the wilderness. By the time it ended, Ansell was dead, along with a police officer. The man who once symbolized survival against impossible odds had become a cautionary tale. His life ended in tragedy, far away from the bright lights and laughter of the movie that bore his shadow. And that's the haunting contrast. While the world cheered for Hogan's Dundee, the smiling bushman who conquered New York, the real bushman who inspired it all was left behind by the very dream he helped create. It's a reminder that movies give us myths, but the real Outback doesn't always offer happy endings. So there you have it, the untold, wild, and sometimes shocking truths behind Crocodile Dundee, a film that started as a gamble, became a global phenomenon, and still echoes in pop culture nearly 4 decades later. If you enjoyed this journey into the wild world of Dundee, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon, because we've got plenty more hidden Hollywood stories coming your way.